The Mormon Church is the wealthiest religion in America. They are the largest private landholder in America. And even on a worldwide stage, they give all but the Catholic Church a run for their money. And yet when you look at the leaders of the Mormon Church, nothing about them really screams conspicuous consumption. One has to get a little closer to see how the leaders of the church benefit from their positions. In looking closely, but not too closely, as Fink would warn us, we will be met with some cold hard numbers, and we will also be met with things that we cannot put a monetary value to so easily. This is the tricky part of this conversation and the safe haven of many church apologists. But first, a reminder that while it is now fairly common knowledge that senior church leaders, known as general authorities, are paid for their service, the church has in the past made sweeping claims that certainly gave the impression the church does not pay any of its leaders.
I explained also that our church has no paid ministry.
So with all that said, let's get into what we do know for sure. Leaked pay stubs and documents have shown us that since 2014, the general authorities of the church have been paid $120,000 a year. And that is just a living allowance. As we'll get into, a lot of their other expenses are kind of already covered, you know, travel and accommodation and whatnot. So that's sort of spending money, really. And it's very likely that in the last 12 years, that amount has gone up. But even if it hasn't, that would mean that for the 117 general authorities that the church has, they are spending $14 million a year to give them spending money.
Our church has no paid ministry.
Now, the real cost of the church is likely much, much higher than $14 million as we move into our second and largest chapter, which is the benefits they receive that don't necessarily have a monetary figure attached to them. Oh, that was frightening. But before we get started here, it's just worth mentioning that as far as I can determine, general officers of the church do not get paid. It's also worth mentioning that the only senior church positions for women in the general presidencies of primary, young women's and relief society are all positions held as general officers. Not only are the female leaders of the church not considered authorities, but they are also unpaid volunteers. I don't know how much a private jet costs. Can't say I've ever been on one. But what I do know is that Russell M. Nelson used one, not in the spiralling, plane on fire, death-defying incident that he's described before, but instead to go and see Jacinda Ardern, the ex-mormon Prime Minister of New Zealand. The likely underlying strangeness of that meeting to one side, the fact remains he did arrive at that meeting by private jet, as shown by Ian S. Ardern's emails that were obtained by the New Zealand Herald. Why do I keep doing this with my hands? I'm going to stop doing that. President Nelson leaves Sydney on Monday morning at 8 a.m. to arrive in Wellington to meet with Jacinda at 3 p.m. It has been incredibly challenging to get all of this lined up. The takeoff and landing times for the private jet were a challenge in themselves. The church claims that the stipend paid to church leaders does not come from tithing funds. But does the cost of a private jet come from the operating budget of the church, which is paid directly with tithe payers' money? And does the cost of their housing also come from the widow's mite? The general authorities of the church live in nice homes in nice neighbourhoods. These homes are often owned by Suburban Land Reserves Inc. and protected by the church security department. The most famous church residence perhaps is the presidential apartment in downtown Salt Lake. While it might be no White House, this top floor apartment, which I'm told has bulletproof windows, is connected to the church office building by a direct secure lift down into the maze of tunnels that run below downtown Salt Lake. What this means is that Dan H. Oakes, who I've been told has taken up residence in that penthouse apartment, need never set foot on the streets of downtown Salt Lake and see the rampant homelessness for himself. I've made this point before, but it bears repeating. Of course, the church is well within its rights to house its full-time elderly leadership. I'm not suggesting that they be put out on the street, but if they could house them more modestly and move them around commercially in terms of things like flights, would the church have more money to help the poor and needy? The Mormon Church is incredibly wealthy. And while the leaders of the church may not be benefiting from that wealth in the same way that the pastors of mega churches seem to, it doesn't mean that they aren't benefiting. And their use of this wealth, or lack thereof, is still a cause for concern. Hey! For example, the first concern might be why we still don't have a Quinton L. cookbook being sold by the church. Come on guys, the pun is right there. I'm not particularly bothered that the gerontocracy which leads the Mormon Church is kept comfortable and healthy. If the church is going to make them work until they're either 70 years old or until the day they die, I suppose it's not unreasonable to keep them comfortable. And then the discussion is really just around lavishness, or the level of that comfort, which is more subjective. However, the main thing that bothers me is that men who live this very comfortable life, provided to them by the church, have the gall to say things like this.
People wondering what the church is doing with its money. Well, as you can see, it gave away about $1 billion last year just to try to help with hunger and feeding the poor. But the purpose of the church is not to feed the poor and the needy of the world.
When Jesus told the rich young man to sell all that he had and give to the poor, it wasn't a particularly ambiguous instruction. And sure, you might say that in the modern world, the elderly leaders of this church need looking after. I still think there is a discussion to be had and points to be made about the level of spend, about what is done with the excess, and about how the church balances the comfortable lifestyle of their leaders with the relative poverty of some of the members from whom they ask for tithing money. For example, when your church is worth the same as the GDP of the country in which you are speaking, and you live a very comfortable life flying around on private jets, should you really be saying this? We preach tithing to the poor people of the world because the poor people of the world have had cycles of poverty generation after generation. That same poverty continues from one generation to another until people pay their tithing. That was Russell M. Nelson on his 2018 world tour, which included a stop in Kenya where he said that. I want to hear your thoughts on this in the comments, and while you're down there, be sure to hit the like button, if you did indeed like this video. If you didn't, then you can not hit the like button, or you can even hit the dislike button, because engagement is engagement after all. The jury is still out about whether people like the videos outside or don't, so tell me about that in the comments as well. I'm loving being outside. I just met the most adorable dog called Frankie and his owner. It was lovely just to stop and chat to them for a few minutes before cracking back on with the video. Side note, if I had £1 for every beautiful dog that I saw on this trail, then I'd almost be as wealthy as the Mormon Church by this point. And while you're deciding whether to watch this video here, please consider supporting this channel through Patreon, where for just $6 a month you get access to bonus content every month. Or, if Patreon sounds like a faff, a monthly contribution of $5 to $10 is also deeply appreciated. Please visit patreon.com/Nemo the Mormon or donorbox.org/Nemo the Mormon to make sure this channel continues.